Welcome, everyone. We're going to be talking today about seasonal immune health from A to Zinc. And I just want to give some acknowledgement to my mentor, Neil Levin, who is also a certified clinical nutritionist, who I have to thank for some of the slides in this presentation. So we're going to start with an overview of the immune system, several branches of that, the innate and adaptive immunity. And we should, I guess at the outset, explain, as I think pretty much everybody knows, that the stress adversely affects the immune system, and sleep deficit affects immunity. So important for us to try to manage our stress as best we can, including getting adequate sleep. Probiotics and colostrum are important aspects of gut health that support immune competence. And we'll be talking briefly about nutrients such as vitamins A, C, D, and the important minerals selenium and zinc, and how they help with immune health. We will also be talking about Epicor yeast fermentate that is been in the marketplace for probably 20 years, but has a long history that has been pretty neat to discuss, and I'm particularly excited about. And we will briefly touch on Larch Arabinogalactans. Try to say that fast 3 times. And we will also be discussing the importance of medicinal mushrooms and astragalus in some of our products as well. So let's start off with a brief overview of the branches of the immune system, the innate immunity and adaptive immunity. The important thing to understand, innate immunity is something that is innate to us as human beings if we acquire it from birth, particularly through the vaginal canal, but also, very importantly, through breastfeeding, where mother gives us colostrum in the first day of our lives, if we're fortunate enough to have been breastfed, and beyond the first day of life, and how that helps our immune system to be able to respond rapidly to microorganisms. But we also have the adaptive immune system, which we acquire and adapt over our lifetime. It's non-specific, and it's independent of, I take that back, that's part of the innate immunity is non-specific antigen independent. It's not antigen specific. The adaptive or acquired immunity is what is not present at birth. It is learned as the immune system encounters foreign substances known as antigens throughout our lifetime. So both the innate and the adaptive immune systems influence the complement system, which is that blue triangle, and how that acts kind of like a switchboard which connects to various white blood cells and aids in coordinated responses. So I think we're all familiar, at least in part, with some of the names of the white blood cells that are on the top of this diagram: the neutrophils, monocytes, mast cells, macrophages. Some of us may not be familiar with dendritic cells, but we won't talk about that today. B cells and T cells, which we will cover a little bit. So let's continue on with another chart. So we see here at the top, immunity has the innate and adaptive systems and how they branched out to different areas. So the adaptive or acquired immune system, which is on the right-hand side of this diagram, learns the best way to attack each antigen, begins to develop a memory for that antigen. So this is also known as specific immunity because it tailors its attack to a previously encountered specific antigen that has the ability to learn, adapt, and remember. So after the antigen is remembered, subsequent responses are quicker and more effective than those that occurred after the first exposure. And obviously this kind of ties into why vaccines have been popularized for over the past 60, 70 years that they've been developed. We're not going to get into the pros and cons of vaccines today. I know that's a very important subject to discuss, but we're just going to talk about this as an example in that regard. So other aspects of the immune system we talked about before, like neutrophils and monocytes and macrophages and natural killer cells or NK cells, B and T cell lymphocytes, all play specialized and coordinated roles in surveillance, detection, activation, and eventual destruction of pathogens and mutated cells. Now, we did talk about mast cells a moment ago. Mast cells are concentrated within the respiratory and the GI tracts and the skin, and they release histamine when encountering certain antigens, which trigger allergic reactions such as hives and wheezing. People that are familiar with springtime allergies, for instance, and fall allergies are familiar with that kind of concept as well. Now, immunoglobulin A is considered a bridge between the innate and the adaptive immunity, and one type of immunoglobulin A is secretory immunoglobulin A, or IgA, and that is found primarily in the saliva and the GI tract. And you can think of it like the Coast Guard protecting the shoreline. So the white blood cells responsible for acquired or adaptive immunity are lymphocytes. Now they can branch out into T cell and B cells, both lymphocytes that are in the lymph system, but they branch out, and we'll cover that in the next slide. And I just want to point out before we leave this slide, on the left, the barriers to the barrier system part of the immune system is on the left, is the epithelium, which is the lining of our skin as well as our digestive tract, and the mucosa, which is part of that. Digestive enzymes, which are an important part of that. Hydrochloric acid, for instance, helps to not only help break down our food, protein in particular, but also can help to inhibit the growth, or at least pathogens, fungi, bacteria, etc., that might be trying to come from our food, get past our stomach, and start to survive and grow in the small or large intestine. So digestive enzymes, especially hydrochloric acid, as well as as well as bile acids secreted by the liver and stored in the gallbladder and secreted by the gallbladder in response to fat and meals. Those are important aspects of this as well. And of course, very important, the normal flora, the good probiotic flora in our system is also very important too. So we did talk about T cell and B cells. Well, here's how they get their name T cells. The thymus gland is the immune boot camp and key supporting nutrients for the health of the thymus, which sits under our thyroid, under our neck, in the upper thoracic area and the lower, just beneath the neck. You can see the little black dot there on the human diagram. This is where the thymus gland tends to be very large when we're young and tends to shrink quite dramatically by the time we're a teenager, and by the time we're adults, it's much, much smaller. Key nutrients for the health of the thymus gland is vitamin A for healthy mucous membranes and white blood cells and immune response. Vitamin C is important for healthy immune support, and zinc, which also helps support thymus function and aids the immune response. So zinc is an important component of retinol binding protein, and retinol is another name for vitamin A. So retinol binding protein is necessary for transporting vitamin A in the blood, and zinc is an important part of that. And selenium influences both types of immune cells, being T cell lymphocytes, and deficiency is associated with a decreased production of T lymphocytes in response to harmful organisms. So going over the right-hand portion of this diagram on the right, the stem cells that are developed in the bone marrow, B cells go to the spleen and lymph nodes, but there's specialized ones that go to the thymus and become T cells. So T is for thymus. That's how I get its name. And they, again, work in a very coordinated fashion in that regard. So natural immunity and host defense. Malnutrition has long been associated with increased susceptibility to infectious disease. A well-known example is the association of vitamin A deficiency with the development of severe measles infections, leading to a higher rate of mortality. So selenium deficiency, which we talked about a moment ago, mice deficient in selenium were more susceptible to infection with Coxsackie and influenza viruses, They also tend to develop severe pneumonitis when infected with a mild strain of influenza virus. Natural immunity and host defense, an ounce of prevention. So the importance of host nutrition is to optimizing the host's immune responses and hopefully preventing viral mutations which could cause increase in viral pathogenicity. So what nutrients and ingredients to support immune competence? We talked about some of those. Well, there's also additional ones. We touched on gut flora composition. A healthy microbiome can support normal antibody production. So there is a dynamic interplay between the microbiome and immune system and how it affects systemic immune system function. And this is where having good probiotic balance is important. Also, we do need to understand that the mouth and the respiratory tract also has a microbiome. Microbiome being, of course, where the probiotics reside and thrive. So a healthy oral balance, bacterial balance, is the first line of defense to keep the balance of bacteria in the mouth and body against disruptive influences such as stress, aging, and medications. Now, one in particular that is been popular in the health food industry for about 10 years or so, and one that we have in our product line, is the Streptococcus salivarius, known as Bliss K12. And the Bliss, B-L-I-S, stands for bacteriocin-like inhibitory substances. So the Streptococcus salivarius is a unique, naturally occurring probiotic strain, and it's one of the most numerous bacterial species in the oral cavity. But it not only functions in the digestive tract like most probiotics, but also in the mouth and the upper respiratory tract, like the ears, the nose, and the throat. So when children are colonized with Bliss K12, these cells migrate to the tonsils, adenoids, and the nasopharynx. As you can see, the eustachian tube connects the nasopharynx to the middle ear. So Bliss K12 helps to maintain normal oral defense functions. Kind of a neat mechanism. There are many mechanisms in the immune system. It's kind of like a Swiss Army knife in terms of many different ways that the immune system has developed defenses to inhibit other organisms that don't belong in the system. And here is our product, Oral Biotic, which contains the Bliss K12, supports oral immune health. Also, by the way, helps reduce bad breath. And these pleasant tasting lozenges have a delicious strawberry flavor. They're quite yummy. It is an base of fructooligosaccharides, or FOS, which are, as you know, prebiotic nutrient support for the Bliss. Colostrum. We have several colostrum products, capsules and powder. Colostrum is, again, high in naturally occurring immunoglobulins and lactoferrin, and it helps to increase bioavailability and absorption of nutrients and encourages a healthy GI tract. So this is nature's first immune defense manual as colostrum. So there's lots of immune components found naturally in there that help the adaptive as well as the innate immune system. So both branches of the immune system are supported by colostrum. And we make no claims that all the components such as lactoferrin and lysozyme and lactoperoxidase and complement and proline-rich polypeptides, etc., are in colostrum, because we don't specifically test for them, but we do test for lactoferrin, which is a component that has very good immune support products in it. So immunoglobulins, again, are known for short as IG. And so IgG, for instance, is one particular immunoglobulin, and there's another one known as IgM and IgE as well. Larch Arabinogalactans are coming from a larch tree, and they help to support healthy intestinal flora and aid healthy immune functions. And a healthy, again, microbiome supports the immune system, promotes normal activation of specialized immune cells. Larch Arabinogalactan studies have been done with multi-gram amounts, and larch Arabinogalactans also act as a prebiotic, which is helpful. And here's an example. This combines several products together, colostrum as well as arabinogalactans, as well as olive leaf and astragalus root, as well as eleutheral root. We also have another colostrum product. It's a very specialized one known as recovery factors. That's found in our Now Sports line. It contains a specific colostrum known by the patented trademark name Tegracell, which is derived from colostrum, and it contains lysozyme, immunoglobulins, lactoferrin, and IGF-1 or insulin-like growth factor 1, which helps to support healthy repair and growth functions of the immune and gastrointestinal systems. Now, we make a claim that this can be helpful for athletes that tend to have their barrier function could be reduced by intensive stress. However, this can also be a product that the average person could benefit from. In my opinion, you don't have to be a stressed, exercising, Olympic-style, pro-type athlete to benefit from recovery factors. And let's also touch on melatonin. Melatonin helps to promote normal sleep cycles. We all know that. But also aids in immune system regulation. And it's something that I like to take on a nightly basis. And if I'm not feeling well, I may double up on melatonin and typically wake up after a good night's sleep feeling fit as a fiddle. Now, one caveat is that melatonin should be avoided in autoimmune conditions. So let's touch on Epicor. It's a proprietary fermentation process that is derived from Saccharomyces cerevisiae yeast. Now, Saccharomyces cerevisiae is also what we find in brewer's yeast and also baker's yeast. So it's very common yeast. And clinical studies have shown it to support the body's ability to initiate the proper immune response at the appropriate time, thereby helping to maintain a healthy immune system and a balanced immune system. So the story behind this, there was a company that was actually involved with working with this similar yeast to fermentate back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and today. That is based in Iowa. And they discovered that their factory workers that were exposed to the dust in the air that this material that they worked with tend to had better overall immune health than the office workers in the same company who were not exposed to this. When they did additional research, they found that it does indeed support a balanced, healthy immune system. So Epicor is neither a yeast nor a beta-glucan specifically, although yeast is used to make it, and it does contain some beta-glucans, but also many other natural compounds. So it's quite a unique product. But again, very important to understand that the immune system needs to be balanced. There's just like we have a military in this country that helps to protect us in times of war, when we need to marshal our forces and fight the battle that needs to be fought. But we also, when it's time of peace, we don't want the military patrolling our citizenry and the streets unnecessarily, treating everybody like criminals, which is not, or like enemies, for should say. So Epicor has that ability to modulate or balance the immune system. Helps support a healthy immune system when it needs to be, but also helps to tone it down when the battle has been fought and hopefully won. So Epicor, when used on a daily basis, can support a proper functioning of a immune system, bringing it into a state of balance. So thus, as I mentioned a moment ago, more modulatory than stimulating. And here's an example of one of our products that contains Epicor. There's also the vitamin C as well as vitamin D, which we will touch on a little bit later. Zinc, which we mentioned earlier relating to healthy immune system, and selenium, and the Epicor, as well as olive leaf extract. We will not touch on olive leaf extract today. Now, another interesting botanical compound is Andrographis paniculata. Registered trademark name for that is peractin, which is a patented extract of Andrographis paniculata that has been shown to support a healthy and balanced immune response by modulating the immune system's production of specialized immune cells. The typically researched amount is 100 milligrams in most studies. We have that paractin in a 10 milligram amount in our air defense formula, which is for healthy respiratory function and seasonal immune support. And you can see that it has some of the nutrients we mentioned earlier. Vitamin A as a 50-50 blend of beta-carotene and retinol palmitate. Retinol palmitate is a stable form of vitamin A. Vitamin C, vitamin E, magnesium, zinc, selenium, and manganese in this formula, along with a number of other supportive botanicals, elderberry, echinacea, the Larch Arabinogalactans, olive leaf extract, astragalus root, ginger root, and a few amino acids, the L-arginine, L-glutamine, and L-lysine. So it's a nice blend, nice combination of things. And here's one of our more popular products called Allibiotic CF. I will leave it up to you to decide what CF stands for, but it's something that you would associate with winter. This contains a good amount of elderberry, which is from fruit and berry concentrate. Elderberry is helpful, so supportive immune system. Olive leaf again, which pops up again and again in a number of our products. Garlic extract and oregano oil and arabinogalactan again, and rosemary oil. So very nice formulation in that regard as well. And here's immune recharging mushroom blend called Immune Renew. Contains, won't bother talking about the botanical names. I'll talk about the botanical names, not the Latin names, but turkey tail, sun mushroom, maitake, cordyceps, black hoof mushroom, which is not as well known as some of the other ones, lion's mane, reishi, which many people are familiar with, shiitake, which people are familiar with, as well as astragalus membrane. So these are organically grown mushrooms with the astragalus in a nice combination. And mushrooms contain beta-glucans, which are an important part of the immune system. And these have been standardized for polysaccharides, which support a healthy immune system response as well. Very nice product. So let's talk about the seasonal influence of on cold and flu symptoms. Obviously, I think most of us know this, pretty well known, that winter is the time for cold and flu, and spring and summer and autumn are not. We can see that represented here. So this graph lends support to the observation and the theory that seasonal variations in immune health are thought to be linked to the effect of sunlight on vitamin D levels. So let's explore that a little bit more. So we can get vitamin D, of course, from sun exposure certain times of the year, not throughout the year, depending on the time of the year and the season and what part of the country we live in. So obviously, if we live closer to the equator, we would get good sunlight year-round, but when we are in the northern hemisphere, as we are, tends to be obviously not as robust during the winter months. So UVB, ultraviolet B rays, will convert in the skin a certain type of cholesterol compound into a cholecalciferol, which is a pre-vitamin D form, that is then transported and converted in the liver into a pre-vitamin D form called calcidiol, which is then converted in the kidneys into calcitrol, which is a biologically active form of vitamin D. We see in this box here that this influences calcium absorption from the bowels and also calcium reabsorption from the kidneys and the release from bones. And this important thing to understand and appreciate also is that vitamin D affects approximately 2,000 genes out of the 20,000 some odd genes that we have in the human body. Roughly 10% are influenced by vitamin D. So it's a very important, and up until recent years, underappreciated role of vitamin D in the body. And it does help involved in regulation of cell proliferation, and it does affect every tissue, including the brain, and can also affect leptin signaling, what has to do with weight and appetite control. Let's see, is there anything else I want to cover? Well, I guess one of the things I just want to point out is that liver and kidney health is an important part of the vitamin D equation. So when people may have impaired liver function or impaired calcium function, we can't just assume that someone who might take a vitamin D supplement, for instance, may get the benefits that they're looking for. And what are the deficiency risk factors? Well, advanced stage, the older we get, less likely we are to convert our vitamin D for reasons I mentioned. And if we are indoors a lot, institutionalized, homebound, and when I say et cetera, that could be people that work a 9-to-5 type job Monday through Friday and don't get out as much on the weekends during summer months. So it can be a factor. Sunscreen use, SPF of greater than 15 can actually reduce the skin's vitamin D production by 99%. So as important as sunscreens are, as important as it is to prevent burning of our skin, we also need to be aware that there is a need for perhaps the first 20 minutes or so of sun exposure to help us make more vitamin D in our skin. And if one is dark-skinned, one makes much less vitamin D potentially compared to Caucasians. And if one is exposed to air pollution in major cities, that can create an issue. Winter months, northern latitudes certainly reduces our ability to make vitamin D. We don't make it during the fall, winter, and early spring months unless you're fortunate to live in places like Hawaii or maybe southern Texas or places like Florida. Interestingly, obesity can be a factor in vitamin D deficiency. The larger people actually have lower vitamin D levels and because vitamin D is not available to the body as much. And if one is malabsorbing due to celiac disease, which is a severe form of gluten intolerance, autoimmune condition, or has Crohn's disease, which affects the bowels, or cystic fibrosis, then there can be an issue there where one is not absorbing vitamin D as well. Renal and liver disease, I mentioned earlier, can be a factor. And if one is on certain medications, anti-epileptic or HIV medications, that can also affect vitamin D status. So a lot to keep in mind. So it's never as simple as how much vitamin D do I need to take. There's a lot of factors involved. The FDA released a new reference dietary intakes for vitamin D last year. The level for, depending on one's age, can range from a low of 400 IUs for infants to 600 IUs through the area from 1 year of age all the way up to 70 years. And then the government has established 800 IUs as more important for people 70 years and over. These certainly are not necessarily upper limits. These are conservative government recommendations, but there are certainly other medical organizations that have advised higher intakes than that. Important to know that there are, as you can see, under each 400 or 600 or 800 IU, you'll see microgram amounts, 400 IUs being 10 micrograms, 600 IUs being 15 micrograms, and 800 IUs being 20 micrograms. These are what we're starting to see appearing now on labels in terms of translating an international unit, which is a measure of activity, into an actual weight amount, which is listed in micrograms, 10, 15, or 20. And good rule of thumb, if you can remember that 400 IUs is 10 micrograms, if you're trying to translate into 4,000 IUs, which is 10 times more, well, it'd be 10 times more of 10 micrograms or 100 micrograms. So you'll be seeing that on labels as well. So some simple math there to help guide us in the future when people are asking, why is this number on here? What does this mean? And we can help them understand that it has to do with a weight measurement as opposed to a unit of biological activity. And let's wrap up with a very important book written by Dr. Michael Holick, and I'm going to quote him. Dr. Michael Holick is one of the leading vitamin D researchers in the world for the last 30-plus years, and he wrote a book a few years ago called The Vitamin D Solution, which I highly recommend. And here's a quote from part of his book. I recommend to all of my patients that they should take 2,000 to 3,000 IUs of vitamin D a day from dietary sources, sensible sun exposure, and supplements. I believe that it's important for women to take at least 2,000 IUs of vitamin D a day. And he continues, there continues to be a strong evidence that increasing vitamin D intake has other health benefits besides those for bone health. And he concludes, from my perspective, there is no downside to increasing your vitamin D intake to levels I have recommended in the vitamin D solution, which is 1,000 IUs of vitamin D a day for children and 2,000 to 3,000 IUs of vitamin D for adults. And you can certainly get references. He's had a number of research articles you can find on PubMed. For instance, this one is quoted from the New England Journal of Medicine. So again, this is general advice regarding safe levels. Some people may require more, especially if shown to be deficient based upon blood tests. So it's important to help encourage people to know their vitamin D levels by getting blood testing. How often? Well, some people say I get it done once a year. Well, maybe once a year might be adequate, but depends on what time of the year that was done. If one had their vitamin D levels done in the summer, let's say July or August, for instance, and it showed a good number, what is their vitamin D level going to be in January if they're living in the cold northern climates? Don't know. Depends on, again, how much vitamin D they're getting from a supplement. They're not going to get any from the sun unless they're living in a warmer area. The more deficient one is in vitamin D, the more one may need a larger amount for a few months to build up levels quickly. But again, that would be guided by what blood test might show. So the more sufficient one is in vitamin D, the less is needed to maintain those levels. So there's great variation in individual need. But what's the upper level of safety? The vitamin D safety has been confirmed at up to 10,000 IUs per day. And that's an important thing to know about. So again, sometimes people are concerned about, well, you know, the government's told me for years I needed 400 IUs, which we now know is enough for an infant. And we were told since the 1960s that was enough for adults. Now, even conservatively, the government is recommending 600 to 800 IUs, and here we have a world-class expert in the form of Dr. Hollick, who's recommending certainly amounts greater than that, which I think we all know are quite commonly consumed amounts of vitamin D. So at least to kind of give you an idea of the highs, the lows, and the in-between to help guide people and how lab testing can be of help.